Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. This week, I interviewed one of the founders of Innovation Leader, a business publication based in Boston that is sustaining itself on $695 a year subscriptions. If you follow the digital media sector, you've likely noticed that advertising as a business model is on the wane, with the Facebook and Google duopoly sucking up just about all the advertising money flowing online. Publishers have been forced to find alternate revenue sources to fund their content. One such source, subscriptions. More and more publishers are rolling out subscription and membership programs, and many have been successful. One such success, Innovation Leader, a small business-focused publication that launched in 2013. It carries no advertising, has a hard paywall, and charges subscribers $695 a year. I recently sat down with one of its co-founders, Scott Kirstner, and asked him about why he settled on such a high price point, how the publication markets to new subscribers, and how it approaches content development. Let's jump right into it. Hey, Scott, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Simon.
So before we get into talking about your media venture, let's talk a little bit about your career background. Like I was looking at your LinkedIn profile. It seems like you're a longtime journalist.
Yeah, I mean, journalism is always what I wanted to do from the time I was a little kid, and making newspapers at like my grandparents' dinner parties and distributing them. So pretty much right after college, found a job at the Boston Globe, helping them launch digital publishing, kind of in the first .com era. And then really moved from there to doing a lot of long form journalism for Fast Company and Wired. I wrote for the New York Times for their long lost circuit section that covered technology, and then did a bit of writing when I was on the West Coast for Variety and the Hollywood Reporter, covering tech and the entertainment industry. So have always really liked the practice of journalism and storytelling.
And you were very early involved very early on in the .com days of journalism, right? Like you were there at the very beginning when the Boston Globe launched its website.
Yeah, so it's funny. I mean, that was my only way that I could figure out how to get a foot in the door in the newspaper industry, because right after I graduated from college, newspapers were still doing okay. It wasn't falling off a cliff at that point, but they weren't. There was a recession. They weren't doing a lot of hiring at that point, and so really the only way I could figure out how to get hired, I had taught myself HTML when I was working for a management consulting firm here in Boston, and so I could build some simple web pages, and I was really fascinated in the possibilities of the web as a platform at this moment where a lot of the way that people experience digital content was on America Online or CompuServe or other proprietary online services. So I had like a little bit of HTML skill, and that was the way I could figure out how to get hired by a newspaper, hired by the Globe, to sort of help them think about transitioning their content from really just existing in print to living on the web as well. And it was a really nice coincidence that I met my two co-founders for Innovation Leader at that job in the late 90s.
Mm-hmm. And what did it feel like to be assigned to run a newspaper website in those early days? Like, was it exhilarating because you didn't really know what this stuff would amount to, or was it kind of being like relegated to writing obituaries? Like, I'm reminded that like the Washington Post, up until not that long ago, had like a completely separate office for its website staff that was like housed in like Northern Virginia, whereas the print newspaper was housed in downtown Washington D.C. It was like treating it very much as like this lower caste almost. How did you feel like working at this kind of untested medium during these early days of newspaper publishing?
Well, it was kind of awesome, to be honest. I mean, we like the Post, we had an office that was separate from the Globe's headquarters and newsroom. So we were in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood, right across from the Boston Public Library, and had our own office space and a separate culture. And no one was really paying attention. I mean, in the 95, 96, 97 era, newspapers were still doing okay in terms of their print advertising and even their classified revenues. And so they weren't really tracking that closely what we were doing. And, so we had access to the content. We were either building or buying our own technology. And it was kind of funny. The only time that really the senior management would come over to our office was usually in April, around April 15th or 16th, when they ran the Boston Marathon, because our office had an amazing view of the finish line of the Boston Marathon. Mm-hmm. So people would come visit really just to watch the end of the Boston Marathon, and we'd throw a little party that day. But the other 364 days a year, it didn't seem, they wanted to see some revenue. They wanted to see that we were kind of exploring business models for banner advertising, or other kinds of sponsorship, but there wasn't a whole lot of oversight. And it was a moment, too, when the Globe was still owned by the New York Times Company. And so we'd often compare the way the Times Company was moving really slowly with the New York Times, because that was the august, important brand that they cared about and wanted to protect. And everything had to be, done carefully, versus the Globe. We were kind of more of the, kind of run and gun cowboy, just let's build something and see if people like it approach. There wasn't as much of a sense of we need to protect the brand and everything that we put online.
So let's flash forward to, I think, 2013. What led up to the launch of this publication called Innovation Leader?
Well, I had spent the last 12 or 15 years really after that job helping the Globe launch its website, doing a lot of business journalism and covering both innovation in the startup ecosystem and also innovation inside bigger companies, and wrote really fun feature stories about Disney's Imagineering division, or visiting Ford or GM's R&D. So paying attention to kind of Google and how they were pursuing innovation as they grew, those types of companies. And my two co-founders, Frank Hertz and Scott Cohen, and I got together and really just said, there's so much journalism about the startup world, whether it's in the Wall Street Journal covering it, or TechCrunch, or VentureBeat. There are a million blogs covering startups around the world, but there wasn't as much coverage of innovation inside these bigger, more established companies. And we just felt like there was really an audience for it inside, call it the Global 1000 big publicly traded companies that, have brands that we all know, whether it's Coca-Cola or Marriott or State Farm. And they were just really struggling with how to make new stuff happen inside these big established companies. And so we felt like, okay, this is an area that is not well covered by other media outlets. And because they're at big companies, we thought, well, maybe there's going to be more willingness to pay for content than there would be maybe in other audiences for stuff like sports or movies or TV related content.
Mm-hmm. And so you launched this publication, but you decided that this wasn't going to be an advertising focused business model, that this was going to be a subscription company. How did you kind of arrive at that decision?
Well, I don't think we were geniuses, and I don't think there was a lot of data about display advertising and its decline in 2013. And if there was, we didn't really look at it, but we just thought, gee, once you start building a business around display advertising, you really have to pay attention to page views. And it also kind of leads to some journalistic practices that I don't really love. A lot of let's get something up quick about a news event because people are Googling it. And you can get a lot of page views that way. Or let's repackage other people's content. And, there's a cool story that The Information just published or the Wall Street Journal just published, and let's repackage it, and kind of summarize it and try to get hits that way. So we didn't want to be driven by needing to pursue traffic, so that we could have a display advertising model. And we just felt like subscription was a better way to go if you want to create original content that really serves a specific audience. In our case, executives inside big companies who have some kind of responsibility for innovation. And it wouldn't force us to repackage and do a lot of listicles and really chase page views, but let us kind of write stories that we felt like other people weren't writing and create other kinds of content. Like we can talk a little bit about sort of our ideas around downloadable resources and kind of actually creating spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations and things that don't actually feel like stories or blog posts. And we just really wanted to do stuff that other people weren't doing and take a little time in creating content. And subscription just felt like the best business model to support that.
How did you arrive at the $695 price point? Like that's a little bit on the higher end of subscription pricing. Like if you look at the Wall Street Journal or Bloomberg Media, like those are somewhere around like $300. The Information, which is like a tech business publication, I think is $300 or $400. How did you guys arrive at the $695?
Well, we knew that we wanted to provide a lot of content. We didn't do a whole lot of comparison around those kinds of businesses. In a way, we were looking at much higher priced stuff like a Forrester Research subscription or a Gartner subscription or a membership to the Conference Board, which is this corporate kind of media and membership association. So we were looking at a lot of stuff that cost $25,000, $30,000, $50,000, $100,000 a year to participate in, and kind of viewing ourselves as, hey, we're going to do media, but we're also going to do events that bring people together in person. And there were a lot of people that were kind of curating these small, high quality events that were at much, much higher price points than $695. So, through that lens, we actually looked at ourselves as like a lower priced option, sort of what Clay Christensen, the author of The Innovator's Dilemma, would call kind of a low end disruptor of these other businesses that were saying, hey, we're gonna charge you $50,000 a year to be part of this community.
Yeah, it's interesting that you name check some of those research companies because it seems like, looking at your website and what you guys have to offer, you're not really like doing traditional journalism. Like it seems like traditional articles, inverted pyramid type pieces that you might see in a newspaper. You're kind of like a hybrid between a research company and a media company, right?
Yeah. And I think the reason for that is like, because we, in our origin, we really always thought like we want to be in service journalism and kind of be helpful to the people in these roles. And, sometimes being helpful to them is writing about the tougher stuff like, why do these innovation programs or these innovation labs fail, and kind of lose their funding, lose their support, so we didn't want to shy away from the more difficult stuff, but we wanted to think about like, what do they need? And some of what they need is reading articles about other companies and, us writing about how Disney or Starbucks or, recognizable company, Fidelity Investments, are structuring their own innovation efforts. But some of it is that like deeper research. And we don't just pick research topics out of a hat because we think they would be cool to do. A lot of it is paying attention to email that we get from members and talking to members at our events and hearing like, hey, there's an issue that's emerging. And one example that I like to use is hiring a more innovative kind of person in these big companies and the sort of need for entrepreneurial kind of a different kind of talent at these big companies. And so that'll lead us to do maybe a 40 or 50 page research report on how are companies addressing that problem of getting new kinds of talent to join them. So yeah, we want to think about content in lots of different forms and formats, not just the inverted pyramid type of news story.
So like, give me a sense of what your output is in like a given, your average week. Like what are you actually publishing? Because you guys are publishing, like, it seems like these really meaty case studies. So tell me about what you're on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis, what you're creating.
Well, as I alluded to before, like we really think about quality versus quantity. And so we never set it up to say, hey, we need to have a room full of journalists who are each putting out 5 posts a day, because it does lead you to like a lot of stuff based on a quick phone direct message, or email interview or repackaging other people's stuff. And so also the kind of journalism we're doing, like it sometimes just takes a long time to get these big companies to agree to an interview. They're not like, they're not like the 2-person startup in the garage that's like super happy to get any kind of publicity. These are companies we're writing about like, Land O'Lakes and Key Bank and Baker Hughes and Embraer that are, have corporate communications teams. So it can take a little while to get them to say yes to an article. But, usually we're publishing really just 2 or 3 things a week. And some of those things might be a case study, like Land O'Lakes, the dairy company, they're a huge company. They're like a $13.7 billion company. And so it's why did they start an accelerator for food entrepreneurs? So that would be an example of, a type of case study that we might publish. But other stuff we publish is like, it might be a video replay of a webinar that we've done recently. It might be a photo gallery from one of our live events where it's just some pictures of, what happened at our latest live event. Or it might be kind of something that we think of as a resource or a tool. Like one that we're working on right now is really just a short PowerPoint presentation on how to think about where these innovation groups should fit in the overall org structure. And so, that's where we'll get somebody who maybe has been a corporate innovator in the past to create something for us that's going to be useful to a lot of people in our membership who are all thinking about, gee, are we situated or sitting in the right place in the organization, or are there some better ways to structure innovation? But, a typical week is maybe 2 or 3 new things going up on our website, not 20 or 30.
And how many people do you have working for you? Like, what kind of things are you hiring for? Are you looking for traditional journalism like backgrounds, or like what's the kind of skill set that's that when you look at the spread of your company that you have?
Well, we're still a pretty small 10-person company. And so there's some people that work on events, some people that do sales and marketing, and then 3 folks full-time working on editorial, which is a tiny team given how much we produce. We do use outside freelancers, whether they're writers or people helping with the research reports, or photographers, illustrators, designers. And so we have kind of a network of freelancers that help create content. In terms of the in-house skill set, it's people who have an interest in business and can think about all these challenges and issues that big companies deal with. It's a lot of bureaucracy and it's a lot of process that they have to kind of wade through to make new stuff happen. So it's an interest in the subject area, not just I want to write about cool startups and try to predict, who's going to be the next Airbnb. And then it tends to be people who are writers, but might also be able to produce a podcast or produce video or do some design work. So it really is, kind of that Swiss Army knife set of skills of someone who can write, but also knows their way around, Photoshop or Illustrator or Canva, or, can create other kinds of content aside from just, the 750 word story.
Are they coming into like a newsroom, or is it like a remote workforce?
All our full-timers work here in Boston in our office, and then we have freelancers around the country, but we haven't really bought into that remote worker model. Just because I feel like when you're a small company, there's so many good, just pulling people together in a room for a brainstorming session is so valuable. I think we may experiment more with the remote worker thing in the future, but just haven't done it yet.
So for that $695 price point, what other benefits are you offering besides just content? Like, I'm seeing some companies, you get access to a special Facebook group or Slack channel, or they do like live conference calls you can call into. Do you guys like offer any other kind of tangential benefits?
Yeah, I think we're always trying to figure out what is the right mix, and are there some things we're doing that people don't care about, and are there some things that we're not doing that they want, like a Slack channel, or lately we've been talking about LinkedIn groups. So what they're getting access to all the digital content, which includes these shorter case study articles, but also 4 research reports that we do a year, which are much meatier, a 60 or 80 page PDF that you can download. Some of them we actually publish in print and may either mail to you as a member, or you can pick them up at our events. We do conference calls where we'll get someone from a big company on the line for a half hour talking about their job and kind of what their priorities are and what some of their challenges are. We also do webcasts that we call master classes, which are a little more slide oriented, and it sometimes it's corporates, but often it's it's one of our sponsoring firms that will be leading a class on, how do you measure innovation? What are the right metrics for knowing if you're having an impact on your company and making it a more innovative place to work or creating more innovative product and services? So conference calls, webcasts, and then also when you're a member, it gets you a pretty significant discount of a couple $100 off any of our live events that have a ticket price. And we do probably 5 to 6 live events each year around the country that people would pay, call it $2,000 for a ticket to. You get a discount once you're one of our members. And then there are also some comp events that we do that are free for members that are kind of an executive roundtable format. We call them the Underground, where you get together with 12 or 14 people in San Francisco or New York or LA. And it's kind of an off the record moderated discussion that people find really valuable.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that always fascinates me with these hard paywall sites like yours is like how they market themselves. Because, with the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, like the marketing is like they have, or at least especially with like the New York Times, less so the Wall Street Journal, is like they have like the metered paywall. So the marketing is like the content itself. Whereas if there's like a more hard paywall, it's hard to let people know about your content. Some of the higher end ones that charge, upwards of $10,000 or more, they have actual sales forces that are, calling up companies and trying to sell them subscriptions on a one-to-one basis. How do you guys, market and find new subscribers?
Well, I mean, you put your finger on the biggest challenge in terms of growing the audience, which is we don't like that metered model, because I mentioned before, we're not putting out scads and scads of content every week. And so, if we metered it and said, hey, you get one article a month, is that more annoying than helpful? If we said you get, 3 articles a month. I also just wonder sometimes if metering for some sites winds up training your readers to say like, oh yeah, 3 articles a month is plenty for me. Like I'm getting enough from this. Maybe there may be some other stuff that I don't have access to, but like 3 is okay. So how do we market? The thing I forgot to mention that members get is we do twice a year, we do a really nice hard copy magazine that collects a lot of the content that has appeared on the website and also includes some original content. It's designed by my friend Patrick Mitchell, who has been the creative director of Fast Company and O Magazine, the Oprah Magazine, and Boston Magazine, a bunch of other great publications. So the print magazine we both send to our current members, and then a lot of people who are on our mailing list who aren't yet members. So that kind of serves as a marketing tool for us. The other 2 things that we do, though, are we partner with other people who put on conferences. And if we're speaking at a conference or moderating a panel, we always love to distribute our print magazine or one of our print research reports and kind of use that as marketing material that you can take home. We have really strong word of mouth among people who are already members. It's just word of mouth winds up being kind of a slow way to grow. We often hear people say like, oh yeah, a friend of mine just got a job leading the innovation team at company X. And I told him the first thing he should do is join Innovation Leader. That's great, but it's not a exponential way to grow the company. We have a fantastic full-time marketing person here who works on SEO and a little bit of paid social and oversees organic social as well. And then we do have one salesperson who's focused on kind of doing outreach to folks who maybe have requested a trial subscription to the site. And so, they have 3 days of access and poking around and seeing what's there. But then at the end of that trial, he'll likely follow up and say like, hey, can I tell you more about what we do and the benefits, or can I see what you thought of the trial? So there is a little bit of that,
and I'm guessing
contact.
you could sell like group subscriptions that might make it worth a salesperson's time, like, to 50 people within a company or something like that.
Yeah. And that is the goal to get, we have sometimes these crazy large companies where, we have one member and it's a 50,000 person company. And so definitely trying to get that up to 10 or 30 or 50 or 100 is a big part of his objectives. And, it's working really well. I mean, he just closed a deal with one of the big professional sports leagues that was like, hey, we want access for all of our teams because we're really thinking about innovation at a moment where there's so many people following their favorite teams from their phone or from home or playing esports or doing things that don't involve going to a stadium or an arena and paying shelling out $250 for that experience.
And you mentioned social media platforms. How do you approach them? Like, obviously, you're not as reliant on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn as like the advertising-based companies, but are you really using them at all? And if so, how do you leverage them?
Yeah, well, one thing we did earlier this year was like we asked our community, how do you find it useful to receive innovation leaders' content? And just to rattle off kind of how that survey went. 87% said they found email to be really useful. The website, 60% said that was the way they found it most useful. Webcasts were next at about 54%. And obviously people could choose more than one way that they found it useful, more than one channel where they like to get our content. And then LinkedIn was number 4 at 44%. And the other social media platforms are really low. So Twitter was 13% and Facebook was just north of 7%. So our audience is really a B2B audience. And we had kind of been looking at LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook as pretty much equal and thinking like, hey, those are all ways that you can reach business people. So this data kind of surprised us that so many people found LinkedIn to be the best of the social channels. So we're really trying to focus more on that. And not focusing necessarily less on Twitter and Facebook, but just trying to be realistic that, I think, this data showed us that a lot of people at big companies are not on Twitter as much as maybe you or I are, where we're looking at, TweetDeck or looking at our Twitter feed all day. And that a lot of people still look at Facebook as like, that's where they want to see photos of their friends' kids or weddings or vacations. And they don't necessarily love for work stuff to be showing up in the Facebook feed.
Well, you mentioned email, and are you distributing like entire content pieces via email, or is it mainly just kind of teasers and getting them to click through? Because like a lot of these paid publications are having kind of self-contained emails where, I'm thinking of like Ben Thompson's Stratechery, where you don't actually ever have to click. Once you subscribe, you never have to actually click through to his website because his like daily update is entirely contained within the email. How do you approach email?
Well, yeah, we should experiment more with that, I think, with, sending full pieces by email. I generally find that most of I don't get Stratechery, and most of the emails that I get don't have that approach. And so maybe I just haven't been exposed to it yet enough to sort of change my habits versus like wanting an email to be a, minute read or less. And yeah, maybe I'm going to open up some of those articles, or save them for reading later. So yeah, our approach is kind of, we do 2 editorial emails every week. One of them is on Wednesday, and it's kind of a digest of everything that's new on the website, or maybe it's a conference call or webcast that's coming up, or it has a little bit of conference promotion, but it's kind of the standard, here's a first paragraph or a tease about each of, call it 5 different items. And then Friday, the thing we're doing to try to get more conversation going on with our readers is we do something we call the Q&A on Friday. And it's often a member asking a question anonymously to the rest of the community. And one example just might be like, how does the budget process work for your innovation program? What can you tell me about? This is very arcane stuff, but it's sort of what our members want to know about. Like, how do you get money for this program? And we'll have people, who get that email and they just respond to it, goes to one of our staffers, and we collect up the most interesting answers and share it as the answers in the following week's email. So if you imagine an email with a question section, here's this week's question. And then the answer section is, here's the answer to last week's email. And for us, it is turning out to be a really good way to catalyze conversations because just a lot of our readership, they don't look at the comments section of the articles as a place that they want to converse. I think because they're at these large companies, either they're just really reluctant to kind of engage in public and ask questions, with their name or their company attached to it. Or in some cases, they have a social media policy that's like, hey, because you work for Boeing, you can't just go posting questions about our strategy or whether we're doing things right or wrong out there on the public, public internet. So kind of the Q&A email and giving people a little bit of the shield of anonymity when they ask questions is what we do on our Friday email.
And like, is your readership like kind of like a reliable, consistent readership, or is it more like they're popping in for specific case studies or when they need to do research for specific projects? Like, how are they consuming your content on average?
No, it's a pretty consistent readership in terms of, folks opening the emails, and consuming the content. I guess I would say the interesting dynamic for us is like, we really have two kinds of readers. One is a reader who, has just been given responsibility, kind of new responsibility for an innovation program at a company. And it's like, hey, Simon, you're our new vice president of innovation. Go figure out what we should be doing. And so that, call them the like newbie innovation leader. And, that might last for the first year or two of setting things up and figuring out who should be on my team and how do I get budget and, should we be engaging with the startup world or kind of what should our strategy be? And so that's a much more active reader for us today because they have such a high information need. And so they'll go onto the website and, they'll be downloading and reading all the reports. They're really participating in conference calls and webcasts. They're, opening and clicking the email at a higher rate than maybe other readers. And, the other reader is call them they've had something in place at their company for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and they're interested in improving it and getting more sophisticated and getting better. But I would say like they're probably engaging with the content a little bit less regularly because they have really specific needs where there might be some topic that they're trying to learn about, but they're not laying the foundation for the entire building at that point. They're more like trying to upgrade a specific floor of the building or, renovate a specific office in the building. So they're a little more targeted in their information need, as they get a little bit more sophisticated and, more mature, you might say.
Okay, well, we're running out of time. My last question is like, how many subscribers do you need to sustain yourself? Like, are you guys still aspirational towards this being a sustainable publication, or have you guys already reached that threshold?
Yeah, well, we're in the thousands now of paying subscribers, which is in a good place. I mean, I'd love to get, and we're sustainable today, with this mix of subscription revenue and sponsor revenue and event ticket revenue. And so, we're a company that has really been built off of revenue. We didn't take in any outside funding. So, in a way that forces you to be really honest about your business, and you can't go and hire 50 people, and get great office space right off the bat because, you just don't have that nice 20 million of venture money in the bank that some media companies have. So, we're in a really good position business-wise. I'd obviously love to get to the 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 paying members. And I think it's possible because there are a lot of big companies and they all have at least one person or a small team that are thinking about innovation and new product development and new ventures. So, we feel like there's a lot of upside here for us. And that's what makes it really exciting. I mean, I love being part of a media business that's growing and experimenting and doing new stuff, as opposed to like watching its business crumble or freaking out because Facebook just changed the algorithm or their display ad revenue is going down. I'm an optimist, and I just feel like there's a lot of growth opportunity for us.
Okay, well, Scott, those were all the questions I had. Where can people find you?
We're at innovationleader.com and on Twitter and Instagram and all the social channels as at InnoLead.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. This was a lot of fun.
It was fun for me too. Thanks, Simon.
Okay, that's all we have for you today. Be sure to subscribe to the Business of Content on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. See you next week.